Welcome to 6 Feet Ahead, a podcast for funeral homes. I'm your host, Oscar Guerrero, and today your guest is not your typical mortician. We are joined by Jennifer Lares. Jennifer is a licensed funeral director, embalmer, U.S. Navy veteran, and the founder of Mulling Mortician, a female veteran-owned training and consulting firm. She holds both an MBA and a doctorate in business, earned her CFSP in 2025, and has spent years teaching future funeral pros while speaking at national conferences and publishing industry research. She's even been called a mortuary Mary Poppins, someone who can swoop in to help funeral homes with whatever they need, blending deep technical skill with real heart. So if you're in funeral service or just curious about what really goes on behind the scenes, this conversation is going to be full of insight, inspiration, and a few surprises. So let's jump in. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Same here, same here. So just to start off, if you could briefly just talk a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you start off in the funeral service? Your service spans over 30 years. I know that it began back in the late 1990s. So just curious about what inspired you to enter the funeral profession and what's motivated you to remain passionate about it after all of these years.
I don't have this glamorous story of how I attended a meaningful funeral. I am first and last generation, which sometimes sounds depressing, but then I remember that I'm a teacher, so maybe I'm sprinkling seeds of the future that way. But I was really interested in high school in anatomy and science. And I knew when I was a junior in high school, it was that time to figure out what I wanted to do. And the guidance counselor, they back in the day, the guidance counselors had these directories of professions that you could look through. And so I remember going in there and just looking through it because in my mind too, my family had limited means. So while I'd like to be a veterinarian, the reality was that was not feasible. And I came across the picture of the funeral director embalmer, right? And he's wearing like a white undershirt with a little apron on, and it's this dude with glasses. And I'm just like, what is this? But I'm reading about the description of the job and it sounds really interesting. And so I researched it a bit. I was able to talk to the owner of the one local funeral home that we had, who I would later pester into hiring me. And I discovered that this was definitely the field that I wanted to invest my time in because it's really a fascinating field if you think about it. There's so much that's always changing. No 2 days are alike, no two families are alike. And whether you work in the back of the house doing the care of the actual decedents or the front, there's so much to observe through societal changes and just the generations that we serve. And that kind of pulled me in. And I like to be versatile and be able to work in both sides, but that's the origin of what brought me into it. And then it keeps me excited about it is the fact that it is such a unique field of work. Not everyone can do it. And I think that if you can, and you can do it and do it well. There is a difference of not just being able to do it, but to do it with true heart and do it well. Then I think it can be rewarding in the service that you give to others.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that one of the other things that we found that's very unique about your experience is your military experience. So that I know that you served as a Navy hospital corpsman in mortuary affairs, and then later as a mortuary officer for the Army in Europe. So I'm just curious, how did those military experiences shape your approach to funeral services?
Sure. So basically, this is funny. I joined the Navy at 30 years old, and the Navy is the only branch of service that has uniformed licensed funeral directors and embalmers. And so they look out into the field for people to join. There's usually about 12 of them in at a time. And so I happened to find where they were looking and recruiting for people, and I put my package in and I joined at 30 and I went into boot camp. So you go right into regular Navy sailor boot camp, which was quite an experience. And then you go into hospital corpsman school because we are under, ironically, the umbrella of hospital corpsmen. And so you have to learn life-saving techniques. And a hospital corpsman in the Navy is often a medic. You're attached to Marine groups and things like that. So you're a medic. So I went through boot camp, became a hospital corpsman, but my specialty was mortuary affairs. And so after completing that, and this time I had been licensed almost 10 years. So I'd been licensed 9 years. And so I worked headquarters for a bit. And what's interesting about serving in the military is that you get to meet so many different types of people from so many different places. And that influences your mortuary experiences as well. Because typically in the civilian sector, there's a lot of separation between races of what funeral home serves who. And that's just the way it is, or how it always has been. I think there's probably a little bit more of a change within that as people become more blended. But so I got to actually through my experiences, learn about involving really difficult cases because I was serving during Operation Enduring Freedom and OEF, OAF in Afghanistan, Iraq. So I actually went to Doverport Mortuary and was able to help with casualties from the war. I responded to a mass casualty. So I was able to have that experiences of what happens when the people that come in, the decedents outnumber resources, and it was all hands on deck. And that was in August of 2011. And that was the Navy SEAL loss that we had. And so I learned a lot about collaboration, about working under pressure, about diverse populations that are served. And then within the military, you do things differently, you embalm differently. So there's a lot of things that are different within that, but it helped influence my work in the civilian sector, I think, as well. And then later, I went to work recently as a civilian mortuary officer for the Army. And so I worked in Germany and we oversaw decedents and eligible folks from Europe and Africa. And we primarily worked on logistically receiving them from other countries, which could be tricky because you had to abide by host nation rules. We had to make sure we were keeping the German laws in mind because we were located there. But also, you had to deal with authorities from Belgium or Denmark or wherever these people happen to be. And you had to act quickly. So we'd get a call about a death in a remote area, and we had to look at the pieces that we had and the resources to pull together, not even branch specific, to just be able to perform the recoveries and then getting them into our care. They were usually difficult cases because of delays and various circumstances, and then turning around and getting them back to the US because that was done commercially. So I learned a lot about basically international relations, about differences in how preparation occurs in different places, and about collaborating with the other branches of service. And it was really interesting to be in the civilian doing that kind of work versus in uniform because now I wasn't have to validate that just because I was a little petty officer that yes, I really do need a plane to move a body. Now it was, hey, I'm a mortuary officer and this is where we're at. And people were like, oh, okay. So it seemed like your words had a different weight to them when you're a civilian mortuary officer. That was nice. But it was, again, just a lot of diverse experiences. I've gotten to embalm people of all different ethnicities. And I've learned that there's specialized care involved with different decedent populations that we may not think about. And so it was really just a really enriching experience and one that I think has really helped impact my capabilities and my awareness in the civilian sector as well.
That's absolutely amazing. Wow. Not a lot of people, I don't think I've ever met anyone, and I speak to funeral directors on a daily basis. So no one that I've spoken to that can even talk about experiences like that. So I think that's amazing. Now, when it comes to education in funeral services, I think that you've earned your MBA, you teach mortuary science to students, you've started Mulling Mortician. I'm just curious, like, what gaps in training or professional development did you see in the industry that really prompted you to start Mulling Mortician?
I know that we have continuing education requirements in most states, right? So you have to get that check in the box. And a lot of times you end up paying for some packaged offering from a CE company. And I would take these courses and there wasn't a lot of value attached to some of them. Or I remember finding like typos and craziness in one of them. And I'm like, what is this? And it was one of those things where I would be done with it and I wouldn't really use it because it didn't really resound with the work I was doing. And so I thought we need a way to create not just for the CE requirement, but for our own development. We need quality continuing education that's applicable. And another thing is access. So going to events is a lot of fun, right? Going to technical seminars or conferences and getting to hear speakers that talk about these exciting things. That's wonderful if everyone can afford to do it or if you can pare your staff down to do that. But realistically, that's not the case for most firms, right? And sometimes you'll go to an event, and I've encountered this a lot. You will go to an embalming or a technical seminar, and you'll want to recreate some of the things you saw, but maybe you don't use that brand of supplies, or maybe you don't quite serve that type of client. So you have to figure out how am I going to tweak this now for the items that I use. And so what I like to do is bridge that gap by going to a location, taking into consideration what supplies they use, what brands, who they serve, and then basically taking the technique or the concept and being able to demonstrate it with the things they have access to for the clientele that they serve. So if a firm has a specific, and I enjoy technical work, but I also recognize that while some families will choose embalming, all families are going to have to meet with a director at some point, regardless of disposition. So I'm trying to also make sure I'm really taking care of those folks. So I'm creating content about things like difficult conversations. And I think because I teach, I see a lot through the eyes of my students that reminds me of the beginning and what it felt like when I had to give somebody the bill for the first time and ask for payment. Or how do I talk to a family about trauma and do it gently but correctly? How do I talk to a family about someone who's morbidly obese and limitations that I might have in my casket selection? And so those are the types of things that I try to create content around and educational material around. Things like the conversation, attention to detail, again, the technical piece. I do a lot of work with airbrush cosmetic because I feel like that's a really good option that we're not utilizing enough. And a lot of the time, and that wasn't taught necessarily in mortuary school back when I went because it wasn't as prevalent or available. And so I like to teach people how they can use that regardless of the clientele they serve. And so the gap really is bringing training to the people, because I can go to a location, I can teach 4 or 5, however many people at a time, and your business continues as usual. And I can help you work on cases that you have right there. Or maybe you want me to shadow and work with your directors on some services or some arrangements. And another thing too is just really we need to revamp the conversation we're having with families about disposition and embalming and things. And I feel like I can help with that if there's receptiveness to it. And I think that's where opportunity lies, bringing training to the people, bringing applicable training to the people that actually makes sense for them. And because I don't work with a supplier, I'm going to go and look in your cabinet and say, okay, here's what you got, here's what we're going to use. Or okay, this is who your clientele you serve, and here's the way we're going to do it. And I take into account the company's guidelines, their documents they use. If they have a training, I will incorporate their processes, what software they use. So it's truly customized. And in addition to that, I create more generalized content. Like I have an ergonomics webinar that I'm putting out next month, and it's ergonomics and safety in funeral service. And it's going to go beyond just making a transfer call and looking at practical ways we can not hurt ourselves over time. And so I have a variety of things I put together. And then I'm a CE provider. So I travel with the CE providing abilities, and I can create something for you that is also for CEs. So I just feel like there's an opportunity there. Like people, they have to still have business as usual, and they don't want to have to pick who they send to a training necessarily. That's hard. And then you have the ones that don't get to go. Or so what if I can come, and also too that gives everyone an equal opportunity, so you're going to see who takes advantage of that training and shines and who doesn't. And I've had that. I actually create reports for the leadership after I do a training where I will share my observations, and they have an idea of how, because it's not that I'm not giving them the training, it's some of them are just, they maybe aren't as receptive, and this lets leadership know. So you learn a lot about your people too. So it's just a nice collaboration between myself and firms and professionals out there.
Let's talk a little bit about the people, right? Because this is like one of the big problems that when I speak to funeral homeowners, one of the big problems that they tell me about is they don't have enough staff, or they don't have, yeah, they don't have enough staff. They can't find staff. I actually, other than just marketing and creating websites, not even creating them, but optimizing them so that they can be found, have actually even considered starting some form of staffing because I see that there's a need for this. Why do you think that this exists? And what can they do to prevent that?
I think the need for staffing, I think it exists for, you have a couple different things going on in the world. So you have persons that are at that age where they're starting to retire or pull back from maybe as much as they were doing. You have a new generation that's entering the workforce, which has a different value system than maybe prior generations, right? They're what they find important and fulfilling is going to be different, maybe. They don't have the same mindset of maybe the 90s Gen X people like myself. And I think because of that, expectations have to be different too. And I know because I teach, I see the students and they'll go in with a lot of fire and ideas, and they want to stay and contribute and be part of something. But if they go into a place where that's not really, that culture isn't there, they're not going to stay. And as a result of that, you're going to have people that they talk about this in a general sense too, in multiple industries. They talk about quiet quitting and the people that are just putting a check in the box of coming into work, right? We don't have the luxury of having people that quietly quit in our field of work, because if they don't have their attention, their focus on what they're doing, that's not going to work out well for us. But I think we can be creative in attracting and retaining talent if we recognize it firsthand, and if we're open minded to ways that we can provide compensation that makes sense. And I know that 3/4 of our students are female, and they're typically going to be the moms until men can reproduce, which doesn't look like that's happening, right? So we are tasked with this duty and this task. And what that does is it pulls you out of the workforce, it can limit you for a bit. And then once you return, you're going to be called upon for things like the school nurse call, the child sick. So you're going to need things like maybe more time, or maybe insurance is more important to you. Or maybe if there is a daycare or a child care facility in your area, if you can offer your employee a discount or some type of agreement you've made with them. So what about looking at creative ways to offer compensation in other forms, and also looking at outsourcing things you can outsource. So if there are services around that can do transfers for you, because I'll be honest with you, I'm not on call anymore, and that was one of the things I really disliked about working in funeral service, was being on call. Because even if the phone does not ring, you are tethered geographically to a place. You sleep with one ear open because you're waiting for the phone to ring. And then when it does ring, you've got to hurry up, put on a suit, you're half asleep, you got to go perform the transfer, be alert, take care of things safely. And then, depending on how many times that phone rings in the night, you still have to go in the next day and perform your job, your work, right? So you'll go in there, you're wiped out. And I know, like when I was an intern, I was on call constantly because I wasn't making hardly any money. I was making less than $7 an hour. And so what happens is people get tired, right? And if there are ways that it doesn't have to be that way anymore, why are we not looking at that? So why are we not looking at outsourcing? And honestly, as a professional, this is a good time to consider doing freelance work. And I do freelance work on the side too. If a firm has a case and they need me to come in and do prep work for them or restoration, that's another thing our field should be looking at too, is what if now is a good time to consider having more people doing freelance work? And if they are doing freelance work, are you vetting them properly? That's a whole nother conversation. Are they insured? Are you vetting them properly? But I think we have to be more creative in our compensation. I think we have to be more receptive to who we're hiring in terms of their capabilities and their value systems. And I think that the idea, and this is something I see that owners sometimes don't understand, and that is no one is going to love that business as much as you. They're not going to be as devoted to it like you are, because they don't own it. You can't expect that level of devotion and just plugged in, I want to be here all the time, because that's not realistic for most people. It's just not. And it's not healthy if it is sometimes. And so I think we need to really see the opportunity that lies in the new people that are joining the field. And we have a significant number. Mortuary school is not, we're seeing increases every semester in people that apply. And the board scores are going up. People are doing better and getting out. So they're getting to you. But what happens next is they're leaving after 5 years. This is the area we have to really pay attention to. And then think outside the box. What are creative ways that we can make our firm more attractive? And it's easy if you're in a big area, big metro area, right? Because you can outsource. But another thing is, if you're in a smaller area, what if you, I know you're going to cringe at this, what if you and the other guy down the road talk a little bit about combining forces on certain things, not necessarily staff, but resources and things like that, to free up some funds so that you can turn around and maybe make things more appealing from a financial vantage point to your staff. And sometimes it's not all about money. Sometimes it's about investing in your people, professional development, giving them opportunities to shine, letting them be involved in a service more than just washing the car. Get their ideas about something. If you have a unique opportunity to personalize, and personalization takes time and it takes resources, and more people want that, right? So waiting on families now takes longer, and the expectation of creating something can sometimes be bigger than your means. But if you look at what you have and you cultivate ideas from your team, then they're going to be more invested in that outcome of that service, and they're going to feel more fulfilled in their work. And I think that's the thing. If people don't feel like they have an opportunity to grow and they feel like they're capped off, they're going to look elsewhere. And I think that's why too, I see a lot of students that are coming in that have been working in the funeral home in other roles, and then the leadership goes ahead and offers to put them into school, because at this point it's, they know, okay, this is going to be one that will potentially do well in the long term to become a director. So I feel like there's just new ways we need to look at things, because people get tired. And we're talking about burnout now. And I know we had COVID, and after COVID, it's not like we all had a little vacation break to catch our breath, right? It's business as usual. And business as usual, when you have a job that normalizes trauma, is not always the best thing. And so we need to look at ways to take better care of ourselves, our staff, and really invest in them in ways that aren't always monetarily.
Yeah, and we're definitely going through somewhat of a renaissance, a restructuring. Like everything is changing in this profession. Society as a whole now, their approach to cremation. And I think education has to be a big part of this. Not just the education of the funeral home, but the education that the funeral home, the funeral directors in the communities provide the community that they serve. Because in all honesty, like I speak to people outside of the funeral business and I ask them, I'm like, about their plans. What plans do you have for yourself? What plans do you have for your parents? What plans do you have for your grandparents, for those who still have grandparents alive? And they tell me, my mom, my dad said that they just want to be cremated. They don't want to spend the money on having a service. And I'm like, what they miss is they're not aware that the service is for the people who are left behind. They think that the service is still for the person who passed away. But there's no
Mm-hmm.
education about this. Like this
Nope.
is like me alone in a room talking to people, and then they pause and they think they're like, "Wait, what?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is not about them. This is about you. This is about what you're going to have to go through afterwards." And then it's
Yes.
a whole different thought process. So we're going through, and there's so much changing, right? Like now we have the internet and you have social media and it's free to educate people. It's free to put these videos out there to do this. I know that you do it yourself and you've been doing an amazing job. I think that it would be great if funeral homes actually stepped up and started doing this type of education.
Yes, and not only that, but if the FTC, think about this, if the FTC is reevaluating the funeral rule, and one of the things that they're considering is requiring you to have your general price list on your website. Okay. And I tell my students, when you hand someone a general price list, it's like giving them a menu to a restaurant they've never eaten at before. And they don't understand what's an entree and what's a side item. They have no idea. So if you just put that out there, first of all, the way you put that out there, now you're making price the predominant thing. And I think that I had a good conversation recently with a couple of directors in South Texas, and we were talking about price shoppers in that term. Because remember, we as a profession have developed habits that we have to undo now. One of them has been trying to find out disposition before we've even talked about a service. Okay. We've made disposition the thing in the front. Is it cremation or burial? Because I need to know about embalming right now, right? But there's other ways to find that information out. And so one of the gentlemen I was talking to, he says whenever his team gives him a call and it's the person that wants to know about pricing and services, he calls it an information caller. So instead of calling it a price shopper, he says, I'm doing that because if I pick up the phone and they're looking for information, the way that I will automatically wish to speak to them will be different than if my brain says it's a price shopper.
That's right.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, we have the opportunity to educate people. And when you go to websites, I feel like there's two things that always seem to pop up, right? Who they have, the obituaries, which I understand, and pre planning. And a lot of times, and you know this from engagement, right? Videos are the most engaging, followed by imagery, followed by text. So if you're not putting supplemental, if I'm handing you a menu, but I'm not explaining it in any way to you, you're going to look at it and assume that this price is everything you need, or you're not going to understand how something is different. And if you have any pricing on your website right now with no complimentary videos to it, then you're like doing half of the job of educating.
That's
And
right.
like you said, the funeral is not for the decedent, right? And I've had this conversation with my own family. What do you want done? I said, honestly, it's not for me. I said, ultimately, I'd like my body cremated, but at the same time, what you do between death and that, totally your call. I said, do whatever you need to do because I don't know what circumstances will be at that point either. I don't know what I'll have been through by the time I die. I don't know if it's good for you to see me or not. That's a you decision, right? I would
Mhm.
encourage that for psychological reasons. But we need to be able to have these conversations, and people look to us to be educators. And when I did my research on the funeral industry and I talked about oligopolies, and oligopolies are those segments within business where people call you when they need you. It's often based on geography and need, right? I don't know anything about plumbing, but I know that if my toilet breaks or my sink explodes, I'm going to call a plumber, right? I'm going to call the plumber closest to me. I may look at some Yelp reviews, but it's usually time sensitive and he's going to come and I'm going to know whatever he tells me and he leaves. Or cell phone provider. You go by who's in your geographical coverage area, right? You learn a little bit about them, but it has more to do with photo taking than storage and memory at this point, right? And then you go with whatever deal and you go on about your day. You don't know a whole lot about it. We unfortunately are in that category, only it's worse for us because we don't advertise. We don't put out anything about the unstocked goods and services that we offer. And so people come in completely, but they're coming in based on geography, maybe word of mouth, maybe they looked at your reviews, maybe you're even gathering reviews and testimonials. And if you aren't, why aren't you? Especially now. So it's
Yeah.
like you have this challenge as it is. And also, why are you not opening up your funeral home to things besides funerals? Why are you not being more of a cornerstone in your community? You have a building, you have vehicles and people, right? I used to volunteer when I had a firm in Seattle that I oversaw, and we would do food deliveries for the holidays. We would work with a food bank. And during business hours, we'd provide a driver and a vehicle because we had those during business hours to go out and deliver meals to families. And we created community with that food bank and with the people there. And they started to think of us as a resource. You know what I mean? When it was breast cancer awareness, I had a whole table in the front lobby that talked about cancer screenings. And I talked to all these different organizations locally that had material, and I collaborated with them. So why are you not making yourself more of a resource in your community beyond waiting for them to call you? You have to get out there and make friends with them, because then they're going to want to do business with you because they know you. Or like Tiffany Aguilar Funeral Services. I love her. And one of the things I really appreciate about the way that she does her business on her website, she is always showing stuff going on in her community, always showing different things, showcasing small businesses. And that's another thing is when you do business with a small business, there's a human at the other end of that. Like I know for me with Mulling Mortician, when people want to do business with me, or they let me speak somewhere because I am not sponsored. I do not have financial backing that flies me to you. And it's all me, this little veteran owned business. It's a big deal. Same thing with a family owned business. And most of the funeral homes in the US are still family owned. It's not a huge percentage that are conglomerates, contrary to what you would perceive. So it's make friends with your community, and then they're going to want to come talk to you. And in doing that, be responsible for educating them before they have to know and before their brain is halfway shut off because they're exhausted and in the midst of grief. And I feel like you're missing an opportunity, especially with the internet now and technology. You could be doing so much. And I'm telling you, when the FTC decides that all your pricing has to be online, or at least your GPL, which some people are already doing that, your
Hmm.
competitor, spoiler alert, they can get your pricing either way. They can literally walk across the street and get it from you. So
Yeah.
there's no benefit to not putting it out there. If you have a website, you might as well do it because they're going to get it one way or another. But if you're doing that, you've got to tell them what's on the menu and how it works. You cannot just hand it to them and walk away. And you can't make that how you open a conversation. But it's, oh, here, let me shove my price list. And one of the worst things, I'm required by law to give you this. Don't say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's these things
no.
that there's there are better ways. And are you training your staff on how to do this? That's another thing. FTC fines are at $53,000 now, right? Are you training your staff on how to answer the phone? Because if they work for you, they have to be able to give out pricing. It can't just be the one funeral director or whatever it is, right? If they answer the phone, they've got to be able to give out some basic pricing. Are you even training your staff on how to do that? Or if a person walks in the door, how to do it where that's not the center of attention is the pricing. We're only because that's not what's most important to everybody. It's really not. And yes, it's important, but what's more important is honoring and caring for that person that they love. That's what's important. Sorry, I will go down a rabbit hole. But the idea is we do have to educate because where else are they going to learn? And we have the means now with technology. You can be
Yeah.
hosting community events. Come on, there's so many little things. And you can be doing them in ways that are cost effective. Collaborate with other organizations. Talk to American Legion, VFW, those guys, right? Do some veteran specific material with them. Look at other areas like churches and other communities. Go to career day at the high school. There's so many things we can be doing to at least spark conversations. And yes, it takes time and it takes people. I get that. But you may find that you've got some people on your team that'd be really excited to help you with that. I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of
absolutely.
opportunity tied into that responsibility.
Yeah, and there's so much that you just said right there. That was great. Thank you so much because there's so much that's tied into all of that. And even on the technical side, on the marketing side, as a marketer, I'm like, wow, I understand that Google, for example, likes to look at signals. They want to see the signals that the funeral home is active. They want to see that they are the right funeral home to serve up first in the community. So if no one else is doing this and you start doing this and you start sharing these pictures and these videos on social media and you start tagging the other business and they're tagging you back and someone has a blog post, they have a blog post and they're linking back to you. If all of these things are happening, then guess who's going to dominate when it comes to online marketing?
If your
It's
florist is awesome, are you taking a picture of a flower arrangement, being respectful, you're not talking about the family and things like that, and saying, we are so lucky that we have this partnership with XYZ Florist so that we can work together to provide a beautiful tribute to our families that we serve. You know what I mean? Or there's all kinds of small things. And like you have said, you talked about this specifically, I think, in one of your videos about that collaborative piece because it's cross marketing. So you're getting in front of people in multiple ways to different and potentially different audiences, right? So why would
yes.
you not do that? Because it doesn't cost you extra. And that's one of the things I'm working on, like with hashtagging and things like that, because I'm trying to fine tune some of like my social media stuff. So I'm learning that I need to tweak and to have different things on different platforms, right? The YouTube
Hmm.
is good for this, while Instagram is good for this, instead of just copy pasting everything over. When you're using hashtags, are you making them too specific? And are you using too many? Versus are you potentially opening yourself up to a newer audience by having more general things? So it is a learning curve, but again, you probably have people on your team that can teach you some of these, and or Oscar has videos. So
Yeah. Yeah,
there's
that's true.
so many ways to learn things now, right?
That's right. All of that is out there. So let's talk a little bit about the future. These are crazy times. And I know that you have your MBA and your business, the business side of your mind is probably looking at how are tariffs going to affect this profession? What do you think is going to happen? Where do you think everything is headed? How do you think funeral homes can prepare for this?
There's so much going on. Okay, so with the tariffs, right? Obviously, we think, what's the first thing you think about? Merchandise, caskets, things like that, steel. And there was a period of time, remember when gas prices went up? So that's going to impact your suppliers that deliver to you, right? There was a period of time where steel was heavily tariffed, which had to do with caskets and casket manufacturing. And I've studied economics. I am not an economics master, but spoiler alert, you cannot create and do everything on the island of which the country that you live in successfully. You can't, right? Like we can't grow mangoes and do all the things here in a cost effective way. So hopefully later, like the big picture will recognize that and maybe take that in consideration. So what do you do now when a lot of your main suppliers or potentially main sources of parts? And this is something I was thinking about too. So if I'm going to build a crematory, or if I'm going to put in alkaline hydrolysis unit, or if I'm going to put in a natural organic reduction system, are there any parts of it are not created or assembled in the US? Are there any aspects of that that are going to come from somewhere else? Because that is going to impact my cost. So think about if you already had a plan in place to expand and do that. Is that going to be, these are questions to think about. Is that going to be impacted now by tariffs? And I say this because I work with Dinero and we have airbrush equipment. And this is a conversation I brought to them with Open Casket, my kit. And I was like, hey, I noticed that tariffs are coming. Do we need to look at revamping the kit? Are there any elements of it that we need to look at to keep it within that range of pricing that I want to be able to offer it at, that can help compensate for any potential increases on our cost, right? So you have to look at that, this as an owner too. And you have to look at it not only as it's impacting your merchandise, but as it's impacting, like I said, any piece or part of something, even if it's made in the US, if they're getting a piece of it from somewhere else, which is common, that is going to impact your pricing, right? And then you have to look at it from what is consumer behavior right now. There's a lot of fear of a recession, right? And so there's a lot of concerns about financial stability for families. And so they're pulling potentially retirements, they're pulling investments if they have them, right? So what it's going to do is for families that maybe had some financial stability, they're going to be a little bit scared. And then the ones that don't, that never had the savings for the rainy day, things are potentially going to be harder because who is going to bear the burden of increase in cost? Is it really going to be all the suppliers and all the manufacturing companies? No. It's going to be the little guys like us that are consumers. It's going to impact our choices, where we get things from. Maybe we're not going to get things we normally would get anymore. And it's going to trickle into our disposable income and the monies we have available when we have to make funeral arrangements and things like that. So if I'm in a funeral home leadership role, I'm going to be thinking about my goods that I get, any type of goods that I purchase, I'm going to be looking at having conversation with my suppliers. And I'm going to say, hey, is this something I need to be concerned about? Let's talk about this. If I have expansion plans, whether it's construction on a build, anything like that, I'm going to talk to my construction companies and in my companies, my manufacturers, and say, is this something I need to be aware of? Is this something we need to talk about? And I'm going to get in front of it because I don't want to wait until I get that, ooh, yeah, about that. You know what I mean? That conversation. And then you potentially have changes having to do with regulatory agencies like the EPA. They oversee emissions and things from crematories. Are there going to be changes in that? Are there going to be changes on the federal level to funeral service? Are they going to become more involved? Because right now, states have control over these things. They have the oversight, but there's that overarching funeral rule, Federal Trade Commission, the ones that oversee insurance. So there's still federal oversight in various areas too. So you have a lot of moving parts right now. And this is the part where you've got to ask questions, assess your processes, and just really, I would be very proactive in preparing and getting information at this juncture.
Okay.
I would be worried a little bit, but I would be acknowledging that worry and I would start asking questions. I would be like, okay, what do I need to talk about with my suppliers and things like that?
Yeah. Basically, we can't just ignore this and hope for the best, which is unfortunately what some people
Yeah,
are
the
doing, right?
Oscar tactic, probably not the best idea. And I know that you and I talked about this too. There are things going on. I'm in Texas right now, and there are things going on in our states that are not great, having to do with funeral service. And look at things not just from a federal level. I encourage you to look at things from your state level. What's going on? There are some states right now that are having conversations about death doulas and regulation associated with them, right? And about having very clear divisions of duties of who can do what. There's conversations going on about that in some places very actively. There's other states that are starting to get pinged more lately with mishandling of bodies or identification issues, right? So if you start to see these trends, then that also tells you there's going to be potentially more involvement on a state level, right? What if the states become more involved to the point where they need to increase their manning and their capabilities? Who's going to pay for that? Probably licensees, probably the establishments and us when we were new. Maybe it's going to change our continuing education requirements. And again, I say this from Texas because I'm seeing that in recent times there's been a pattern where there's been some really negative stories that have emerged. And it's what does this tell you potentially? And you've got to think about these things too, not only on a federal level of how it can impact your business, but even state specific. And that's an opportunity to differentiate. And I made a video where I talked about this yesterday because I was like, if you're doing things right and doing things well, why aren't you talking about this? Why is the only news that seems to get pushed out the bad news? If I had my own crematory, you would know. If my business had its own crematory, that is one of the first things you would know about my business. Your loved one is not shuffled around town. They come into my care, they stay in my care. If I'm meeting with a family, I'm going to reassure them about a process. If you had a family walk in right now and say, I want to do a tour of your building and I wanted to see the back, or if you had an inspector walk in right now, how would you feel? And if you feel like you a knot in your gut and you have concerns about that, I encourage you to like dial into that and figure out why. And let's get in front of that. It's almost like you have company come by, is your house ready? You know what I mean? And if it's not, or if you're apprehensive, or oh, let me go check. Why do you have to go check? This is a part where we've got to really tighten up. And I talked about instilling a culture where your people need to be able to talk to you about stuff when they see something that can be done better, or maybe something shouldn't be, and don't punish them for that. But we've got to lock in a little better because right now the only publicity out there is negative, and we have the capabilities of changing that. Why aren't we? Why aren't we speaking up about the things that we are doing well, the things we're doing right, getting testimonials from our families, bragging about a process? You know what I mean? Did you know that when your loved one comes into my firm, I can tell you at any given moment where they are in the building? Like, why are we not talking about these things? Because these are the things that matter, and people shouldn't be able to just walk right into a funeral home and take pictures of decedents like that. I teach law, and that I was like, you're kidding. Come on. And you know what? If your building or your refrigeration or your crematory isn't where it needs to be to perform the service, don't do it. Stop performing the service. Stop taking the money. Like, these are obvious things, right? Like, we've got
Yeah.
to
At
just
the
do
end of the
better.
day, that's more about just do the right thing, right? Like,
Just do the right thing. And
yeah.
if someone's working on your behalf, if you are outsourcing, whether it's a transfer, cremation, whatever it is, go look at that place you're working with, pop in there unexpectedly do inspections yourself periodically. Because the idea is that if you are doing your best and performing your due diligence and you're documenting and doing all the things, that you're doing the best you're able to make sure that the services are being handled the way they should be. And you're not going to be caught by surprise because you're already going to know my place does good work, or you know what I mean? So there's just a
Yeah,
lot of things we have to be plugged into right now when it comes to, like you said, tariffs, and then just the general overarching state and federal things that are going on.
absolutely. Wow, that was a lot. And I think that there's just so much valuable information and all that. I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for actually putting out the content that you put out as well, for educating the public. And also just want to ask you, like, if someone is interested in getting in touch with you, in learning more about what it is that you do, how can they find you?
So I have a website, it's mullingmortician.com. And my logo is a thinking Anubis. And you'll find there's links in there to things that I've done. I'm available to do things like speaking events and, of course, trainings and things like that, whether it's general or customized, on site or virtual. You can send me an email. It's mullingmortician@gmail.com. And you know what? If you see something you want to learn more about and you want me to dig into, let me know because I nerd out over just digging into funeral stuff. So if you're like, hey, I want to learn more about this, just say it and I will probably be like super excited about it more so than your average person and do the research. But I'm pretty easy to find. And I do have Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So you can find me pretty easily. I'm pretty noisy.
That's awesome, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye bye.